Today, we're doing something a little different, something I think is, well, it's a fascinating piece of forensic cultural analysis.
It really is.
Instead of the usual stack of immediate reports or breaking news, we are digging into a curated time capsule.
That's right. Our source material today is a very specific collection. Observations, predictions, and some pretty deep philosophical reflections that were all recorded on a single day of the year.
November 14th.
Exactly, November 14th, but spanning 2 full decades. We're starting all the way back in 2005, which, in digital terms, is a lifetime ago, and we're running it right up to today, 2025.
So it gives us this incredible recurring snapshot, a history of the last 20 years, but seen through this one very specific recurring lens. And our mission here is really to extract those through lines, the things that get lost in the day-to-day noise. We want to see what was predicted accurately, what was a complete miss, and what emergent cultural shifts now really define our landscape in 2025.
And we're covering so much ground, the way we consume content, technology, media, societal values.
We're definitely going to be tracking the dramatic implosion of our attention spans, the dizzying rise of artificial intelligence, and that constant friction between personal liberty and collective safety, all through this 20-year window.
What's really striking when you look at it all laid out is just the sheer velocity of the change. I mean, concepts that were just aspirational, almost science fiction in 2005.
Yeah.
By 2025, they become full-blown existential crises.
Right. But at the same time, you also see how some things just don't change.
Not at all. Some fundamental human struggles are cyclical, especially that tension you mentioned around governance and individual freedom that appears in the sources across the entire 2 decades. It's almost untouched by all the technological progress.
So we have this rich mix of material to work with. There are specific tech predictions, some sharp political analysis, and moments of genuine artistic frustration that we can now look back on and assess.
Yeah, for accuracy and, more importantly, for their long-term consequences.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the fragmentation of everything, and specifically our content. We have to go all the way back to November 14th, 2005.
Okay.
The source material back then notes this forthcoming, and at the time, really radical move by Amazon. They were going to allow you to purchase individual pages or sections, or even just a single chapter from a book.
And you have to remember, this was revolutionary thinking at the time. I mean, It completely challenged the centuries-old idea of a book as this fixed, indivisible object.
Right. You don't mess with the book.
You don't. And the logic was, if you, the consumer, only needed that one chapter on supply chain optimization, why should you have to buy all 300 pages of history and theory that came with it?
And the sources immediately made the leap to other media.
Immediately. Specifically calling for movie studios to do the same thing. Their argument was pretty simple. Viewers should be able to download and save just their favorite scenes, not the whole 2-hour film.
And the thinking behind it wasn't just about saving a few bucks. It was about this marriage of cognitive efficiency and an emotional recall. There's a quote from 2005 that just says it all. You don't need the whole movie.
Scenes encapsulate how you feel about the whole thing, and your brain can fill in the rest of it.
That's it. It's such a profound statement about how our memory works, and it perfectly predicted modern consumption habits, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It links directly to that psychological concept Malcolm Gladwell made famous, thin slicing.
Explain that for us a bit.
Thin slicing is just the idea that our minds are incredibly good at making rapid and often very accurate judgments based on these very narrow, specific slices of experience or information.
So in 2005, this was seen as a huge positive for the user, right? Optimize your time, cut out all the filler.
They just retain the emotional core or the key bit of information. The big assumption, though, was that your brain could and would fill in all that missing context reliably.
An assumption that maybe didn't pan out so well?
Not exactly.
So if that was the goal optimization, efficiency, let's jump forward 20 years to see where it landed. We have an entry from November 14th, 2025 that confirms it. The shift to micro-content is complete, but there's a crucial negative twist. The author just says, I think it's gone too far.
The shift is undeniable, for sure. But that expected outcome, efficiency without losing focus or understanding, that's what failed. Catastrophically, you could argue.
The 2025 observation admits that, okay, we can't hold people captive for the 3 hours it takes to read a 19th century novel anymore.
Right, that ship has sailed. But it argues we should still be capable of holding interest for about 90 minutes. The length of a classic feature film or a good lecture.
But we're not even doing that.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Even our big narrative serials are now segmented into these 30-minute, sometimes even shorter, blocks. And they're designed for bingeability, not for sustained focus.
And the goal isn't even the whole chapter or the whole scene anymore. It's that immediate, raw takeaway. The 2025 entry gives us this incredibly useful concept to describe it: exformation. Can you break that down for us? What is exformation, and why is it so central to how we consume media now?
So exformation is, you can think of it as the signal without any of the surrounding context.
Yeah.
Or maybe more precisely, it's the feeling you get from the content, but completely divorced from its developmental arc.
So it's the emotional nugget.
The emotional nugget, the viral quote, the shocking headline. It's the pure essence of the content, but it's designed for maximum immediate impact, not for understanding.
And the source claims that the real driver behind things like short-form video is this constant search for emotional takeaways.
That's the argument, that people are just trying to slake their hunger for that exformation.
Okay, I see the connection immediately. If you're scrolling through a feed of, TikToks or shorts, and each one is giving you this high-intensity emotional burst, the process becomes, and the source uses this exact phrase, anxiety-provoking.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? If people are getting what they want, that emotional hit, why does it produce anxiety?
Because it's a perpetual, unfulfilled search. It leads to burnout, not genuine satisfaction. Those high-intensity emotional hits are, by their nature, incredibly fleeting.
Right.
So you never achieve a sense of comprehensive knowledge or emotional resolution because the context you need for that resolution has been completely stripped away. You get the immediate sense of knowing something or the feeling of outrage.
But you haven't actually processed the complex reality behind it.
Not at all. So your brain is just constantly seeking the next bigger hit of exformation.
Mm.
It creates this state of perpetual cognitive hunger, this high-stakes search for relevance that never ends.
So the very act of consuming this fragmented content is now the source of the anxiety. It's no longer just passive entertainment.
It's an active, stressful search for relevance and dopamine. And that leads us perfectly into the discussion from November 14th, 2024, which is about the exhaustion that comes from this platform-specific communication.
Okay, so if we're already anxious from searching for these quick takeaways,
then you become instantly frustrated when the message itself is obscured or, diluted by the way you have to send it.
this is where we crash into that classic Marshall McLuhan phrase, the medium is the message.
A very frustrating application of it, yes. The sources note that these platforms create different kinds of messaging that users might not even care about. The example given is groups of people who talk entirely in emojis.
So the message becomes less important than its formatting.
Precisely. And that creates this huge communication friction. The medium dictates the form of expression. It favors quick visuals, abbreviations, emojis. But if you, the user, are desperately looking for specificity, for nuance, for a detailed takeaway.
That high-fidelity signal.
Exactly. A platform that forces you into this abbreviated, low-fidelity communication is just inherently exhausting. And the source actually provides a defense of traditional forms here. It argues that for true, necessary specificity, well-written words and phrases are best.
It's a really powerful pushback against that whole thin slicing mentality. It's defending the necessary complexity of language.
Right. It suggests that while, a picture or a quick video can give you that jolt of exclamation, it can't substitute for the precision you need for detailed, complex thought.
I mean, think about the implications for something like journalism or a technical field.
Oh, for sure. If a platform demands you summarize a complex geopolitical issue in a 15-second clip, you're forced to prioritize the emotional hook, the exformation, over the factual context.
And the exhaustion comes from that constant tension, the depth of the issue versus the superficiality the platform requires.
That's the core anxiety of digital life in 2024 and 2025.
That desire for intellectual substance over aesthetic packaging, that's a perfect pivot into our next section, because that aesthetic packaging is exactly what took over the visual world.
Absolutely.
So let's pivot to the function of the image, specifically photography. It has gone through this seismic shift in purpose over the last 2 decades. We have to go back to November 14th, 2006. We see this fascinating, almost clinical claim that the real purpose of photography is documentation. Aesthetics or craft are described as somewhat secondary. They even call that secondary quality the fourth dimension.
This is such an illuminating distinction, and it really gets into the history of what the camera was for. When it was invented, its revolutionary function was to record reality.
Right.
To document a moment in time you could never get back.
Right.
And the source makes this sharp distinction between what it calls level 1 quality, so Pictures of pets, selfies, that kind of repetitive modern stuff.
Which it calls painfully annoying.
Painfully annoying because it lacks that objective record value. It contrasts that with the profound, captivating nature of seeing something, anything, as it existed 100 years ago.
So the value is in the historical record itself, not the technical skill of the photographer or, the beauty of the latest Instagram filter. A blurry photo of a street corner from 1925 holds more objective value than a technically perfect picture of my breakfast today.
In the long term, yes. The documented function trumps the artistic one. But this ideal of documentation collided head-on with the reality of mass consumer cameras.
Smartphones.
Exactly. So we fast forward to November 14th, 2021, and we see this strong philosophical critique in the sources, referencing Eckhart Tolle's observations about Homo touristus.
Ah, yes. The modern person who uses the camera as a proxy for real experience, seeking photo trophies instead of just being in the moment.
That is the fetishization critique in a nutshell. You're using the camera to mediate the present experience, often ruining it, instead of just documenting a past one for later. It's about collecting proof that you were there, instead of collecting a genuine memory.
And that's directly connected to the exhaustion of exformation we were just talking about.
It is. You're capturing the takeaway, the trophy, but you're losing the context of the trip.
Yeah.
The source does offer a potential solution, though, which it draws from the great film editor Walter Murch, his idea of the representational frame.
How would that even apply to the average person with a smartphone today?
Well, Murch suggested that instead of trying to document everything, you should use a series of skills, almost like a storyboard, to capture just the key moments.
To be more deliberate.
Exactly. The goal is to take just one powerful photo that's enough to trigger the entire memory sequence later on. It demands this clear, almost ethical distinction between your real life and your real life, the documented version of it.
It's about reasserting the power of your own mind, your mental archive, over the digital one.
It asks the photographer to be an editor, to be deliberate, not just reactive.
That takes some serious discipline, though, especially when your default impulse is just to capture everything.
It does.
Now, let's explore how major media, TV, and film shaped us over this period. There's a fascinating entry from 2016 where the source notes that the three main influences on their early life came almost exclusively from TV.
And what were they?
Specifically, Upstairs, Downstairs.
Ah, the class system.
Right. Then, the very first true reality TV show, An American Family.
Which was revolutionary.
And finally, very specific architectural features from sitcoms. Things like the Brady Bunch split level or the sunken living room in the Dick Van Dyke Show. The only exception cited was music.
And that pinpoints a really key cultural moment in the late 20th century. The source observes that music in the 60s and 70s was much less visual. I mean, it was influenced by art and fashion, sure, but it was fundamentally more about the music itself.
TV was different.
TV was the primary vehicle for introducing the concept of celebrity. And it provided these aspirational aesthetics. It defined what your house should look like, what social mobility meant, what the hierarchy was, in a way that music, as an auditory medium, just couldn't.
So, given that, what did the source in 2016 predict would be the next dominant inspirational medium? The thing that would replace linear TV?
The source argued it would be VR and AR. Virtual and augmented reality would become the successor to the TV screen in dictating our lifestyles.
And they made some pretty striking predictions.
Almost bizarre predictions. VR stars, for one, and the concept of VR dinners.
Wait, VR dinners. The experience of eating rich food but without the calories, was that a serious prediction?
It was, and think about what that says about our culture's relationship between pleasure and consequence.
It's the ultimate separation of experience from consequence. It's thin slicing and exformation taken to their logical extreme.
Absolutely. It's the desire to consume the pure, emotional or sensory takeaway without the effort, the time, or the physical cost. If you can get the pleasure without the calories, you've achieved peak fragmentation.
It's just so ironic that while this new immersive medium was being predicted, the medium it was supposed to replace, linear TV, was also undergoing this profound change.
A huge change. The observation is that TV has moved from being this universal broadcast event, a shared cultural campfire, to being entirely a magazine subscription.
Right.
And the source laments that culturally reflective content, and specifically references Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror documentary, loses its societal power when it's not freely broadcast to everyone.
So the critique of our media anxiety gets locked behind the very paywalls it should be critiquing.
It's a perfect ironic loop. The shared aesthetic just fades away.
And this leads us directly into the November 14th, 2025 observation. I think this is vital for understanding generational differences today. It's the wiring thesis.
Yes.
And it states, whatever technology you are immersed in from about age 8 to 28 will probably wire you for life.
That's a 20-year developmental window from late childhood through early adulthood, and the source argues it defines how you process things, what your aesthetic standards are.
So for those of us wired between, say, 2005 and 2025, it was the explosive rise of the internet, the smartphone, the personalized stream.
Which is a completely different wiring from the previous generation, who were wired by shared linear broadcast TV. That shift from broadcast, which is a universal shared experience, to the personalized subscription stream, a niche algorithmic reality.
Yeah.
It fundamentally alters the aesthetics that wire your brain.
And that's where so much intergenerational conflict comes from. It's not just about values. It's about fundamentally different ways of consuming and processing the world.
Totally.
So what are the resulting aesthetics of this stream-wired generation? The entry from November 14th, 2023 observes a possibly concerning cultural change. It says, we've retreated into a highly aesthetic period where people are much less interested in concepts, abstraction, or intellectual depth.
This is a direct consequence of that constant pursuit of information we talked about and the immersion in highly visual, low-context content. The author noted trying to post conceptual text art.
Which was a huge deal in the 1960s. The source even cites Ed Ruscha as the king of text art.
Right. And the response to this conceptual art was just overwhelmingly lukewarm and dismissive. The conclusion was pretty stark. We are communicating mainly with images and emojis, and people actively want to be disabused of concepts.
They just want the result, the easy emotional hit, the immediate reward, the likes.
Exactly. And that's the rationale behind the explosion of easily digestible, comforting content. The endless, easy fall photos, the repetitive, soothing nature images. It's the don't make me think culture taken to an extreme. And it's driven by anxiety.
The fear of complexity is just palpable in the source material. It uses terms like being scared of abstraction.
And it notes this cultural demand to just be normal and to provide non-challenging content. People are seeking comfort, but, and this is a chilling phrase from the source, they are doing so at the edge of dystopia.
Wow. That defines the current aesthetic malaise perfectly. Consuming this highly polished, safe, often nostalgic content while simultaneously knowing the complex global world is falling apart just outside the frame.
It's a mechanism for cognitive dissonance, all wrapped up in a beautiful, soothing velvet filter.
A stunning synthesis. And this retreat into visual comfort, this rejection of complex concepts, makes the arrival of our next topic, a multifaceted technological concept like AI, all the more jarring. Let's transition to the technological force that has dominated the latter half of this 20-year period. Artificial intelligence. The sources give us this fantastic year-by-year look at the user experience, starting with the frustration of 2024.
On November 14th, 2024, the people trying to actually use AI in their creative workflow were expressing serious disappointment. The sources cite these constant issues.
Like what?
Debilitating latency, for one, navigating poorly designed, confusing interfaces, and the omnipresent frustration of paywalls that demanded constant microtransactions.
So the user's energy was just draining away.
Completely. Exhausted by the sheer friction of trying to make the thing work. The promise of this effortless tool just wasn't matching the reality of the clunky, expensive process.
So initially, AI was rejected not because of some existential fear, but because of bad UX and logistics.
Exactly. But then, just 1 year later, in the November 14th, 2025 entry, the problem completely flips on its head.
Yeah.
And it just shows the breakneck speed of this development.
So then the new problem.
The latency is mostly gone, the interfaces are better, but now AI generates too much material too quickly. The exhaustion has shifted from implementation to curation.
The tool works perfectly, and now the human is just overwhelmed by its output.
That is the paradox of technological acceleration. We solve the problem of scarcity only to create this overwhelming abundance. The new cognitive burden is filtering, editing, and trying to select the gold from this torrent of plausible trash.
The creator's job has changed from making things to managing a flood of near-perfect drafts.
Right. And the source uses this great process management metaphor. It applies to engineering, to art, to anything. Imposing constraints helps efficiency, but only until the constraints themselves become inefficient.
Okay.
At that point, you have two choices. You either remove the constraints entirely, or, paradoxically, you add even more limitations to try and regain that sense of focus.
And AI's torrential output just makes that worse.
It can completely obscure what's relevant in the creative process because you end up spending all your time just fighting the output rather than refining your actual idea.
Yeah. Which leads us to that crucial philosophical discussion from November 14th, 2023, about how we even define this new technology.
Yes. The source argues very clearly, very firmly, that AI is fundamentally a tool, no different in its essence from a pair of scissors or a hammer.
And the corollary to that is?
If we aren't actively doing things, we aren't using the tools. The responsibility, the agency, always remains with the human user.
That's a powerful simplification. I mean, the scissors don't attack you. They have a limited function. But AI is viewed almost universally as this specter of danger, not just a tool. Why is there such a massive perception gap?
The source says it's because AI is multifaceted and open-ended. Unlike scissors, which have, 1, 2, maybe 3 limited definable functions, the fear comes directly from that lack of defined boundaries, the sense that it could do anything at any time.
So the source makes a recommendation.
A very strong recommendation. AI should be built with a limited number of defined affordances, functions that are constrained, understood, and specific.
Let's just elaborate on affordances for a second. For you listening, this means the specific capabilities that are built into a tool that define how it can be used.
Exactly. I mean, if your hammer could also suddenly write a novel or prepare your taxes, you would be afraid of the hammer.
Right.
So the source is asking us to return agency to the user by demanding limited, predictable functionality. The core question you should ask when looking at an AI tool is, what are the necessary and constrained affordances of this tool? It shouldn't be one size fits all.
That reframes the entire debate. Instead of AI is replacing humanity, it becomes a conversation about design and specialization.
And that reframing shifts the user from being a terrified observer back to being a master craftsman, selecting specific AI implements for specific contained tasks.
This also ties into the idea of creativity itself. The 2023 source makes this provocative claim that AI replacing creative people is actually small potatoes in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, the argument there is that AI's power should be focused on things that are truly beyond our capabilities. Mass calculations, pattern recognition across huge data sets, scientific modeling.
Whereas creativity is fundamentally within human capabilities.
Right, so focusing AI on just generating another piece of art or another pop song is seen as a misuse of its potential, a distraction from more meaningful applications.
And the 2024 argument supports this by sort of questioning the artist's own faith. The source suggests that if you're so easily carried away by AI that you stop creating, it might show a fundamental lack of faith in your own distinct creativity to begin with.
The implication is that the truly dedicated artist will always find a way to interrupt, to diverge from the expected path that an AI would generate.
Which brings us to the source's definition of creativity as a phenomenon of continuous interruption.
It's not a smooth, linear process. It's organic, it's messy, it's constantly subject to human intervention and mistakes and happy accidents.
The source contrasts the focused scrolling that musicians do, going through thousands of synth options for one specific sound, which is a kind of focused search.
With the endless, aimless scrolling on a smartphone, which it says kills the mood. The exhaustion of modern scrolling isn't about the motion, it's about the lack of specific creative intention.
This brings us to a fantastic thought experiment about music, which is an area where AI is moving so quickly from being a tool to being a quasi-creator.
Right.
The November 14th, 2024 source describes an anecdote where the creator fed some old 90s lyrics into an AI music generator. The result was, quote, an amazing performance by nobody.
And it was in a soft metal style, completely unlike the original intent. That phrase, amazing performance, nobody, is the definition of the uncanny valley in creativity. It's technically proficient, but spiritually empty.
And it sets up the ultimate philosophical test, which is proposed in the November 14th, 2025 entry, the Ship of Theseus experiment for music.
Okay, so the Ship of Theseus paradox asks, if a ship is preserved for centuries, but over time, every single plank is replaced, is it still the same ship?
So how does that apply to this AI-generated track?
The source suggests you take that AI-generated soft metal track, the original ship, and then you manually replace every single part. A human musician re-records the bass line, another does the keyboard riff, another does the guitar solo.
The result would likely be totally different.
Completely different. Because human hands and minds introduce intentional and, just as importantly, accidental variation. But crucially, the source argues, the new human-played version would continue to evolve every time it's played live.
A slight change in tempo, a spontaneous improvisation.
A new chord change. That is the essential defining characteristic of real music and human performance. It's alive.
So the essential difference isn't even the quality of the sound, it's agency and variability. AI creates a finished, static product, a static ship.
And human creation is a process of continuous interruption and evolution. The very act of replacing the parts in that experiment would inevitably lead to new ideas, maybe even other songs entirely. It proves that the value is in the process and its potential for divergence, not just the finished output.
And it links right back to creativity as continuous interruption.
Mm-hmm.
When a human replaces an AI part, they're constantly interrupting that finished state, pushing it towards something new and unpredictable. The AI track, however high quality it is, remains a finite, dead object.
Perfectly put.
Okay, we've tracked technology and aesthetics, but let's transition now to the societal and philosophical issues that mark this 20-year period, starting with that constant conflict around individual liberty. The November 14th, 2021 source provides a really deep, and I should say impartial analysis of the global vaccine mandates by placing them in this broad historical context.
This is a really significant passage. It offers this powerful, unifying theory of American conflict, and by extension, global responses to collective crises. The source connects the mandates being imposed across the West. It cites Austria and Germany specifically to the historical pattern of U.S. wars since the 1940s.
How does the source actually structure that comparison? It seems like a big leap.
Well, the analysis makes a critical distinction between World War II and every conflict that came after it. WWII, in the source's view, was framed and largely executed around protecting essential, universal human rights against global tyranny.
Okay.
But subsequent wars, Korea, Vietnam, and later conflicts, the emphasis shifted. They became defined by protecting our way of life, fighting against these external threats like communism, and later perceived threats like immigration or foreign cultural influences.
So the objective shifts from protecting fundamental rights to this more subjective defense of a cultural or social definition of life.
Precisely. And the core conflict underlying the vaccine mandate debate, the source suggests, isn't just a simple debate about public health statistics. It taps directly into that same deep-seated, essential human universal feeling that any imposition, whether it's a military draft or a health mandate, is an attack on our liberty and our freedom.
And that freedom is specifically defined as protecting a cherished way of life.
Exactly. So the mandate, regardless of its scientific merit one way or the other, triggers this historical and psychological programming about imposed control.
That makes the resistance less about the specific science and more about a kind of cultural trauma related to perceived government overreach. The source says this programming needs to be understood if we hope to find any kind of collective consensus.
It's analyzing the psychological root of the resistance. It's a critical reminder that a lot of political action runs up against these deeply ingrained cultural narratives that define what freedom even means to different groups.
So for those whose historical programming centers on defending our way of life against outside forces, even a temporary health mandate can feel like a direct continuation of that historical threat.
And the source is careful just to report on this deep narrative tension. It doesn't take a side on the mandate itself.
Moving from conflict to creation, let's look at this fascinating entry from 2021 about spiritual transfer in art. It connects creativity with the spiritual and visual realm, and it was prompted by watching the Get Back documentary.
The one that showed all the cameras rolling during the Beatles' creative process.
Exactly. And that visual documentation was key. The source observed that the presence of the cameras inherently affected the result. It noted a parallel with An American Family, that first reality show, where the camera provoked behaviors designed for the lens.
So the finished music of the Beatles, therefore, carries the fragrance of a filmed experience. It's not just the music, it's the music created in the context of being watched.
So the recording device itself fundamentally alters the spiritual essence of the final product?
Yes, and the source connects this to the idea that spiritual qualities transfer over. They use the analogy of painting a copy of a Rembrandt. If you paint that copy while sitting in the presence of the original painting in a museum,
right,
some of the original's essence, its spiritual qualities, transfers over simply because your work is touched by its proximity to the masterwork.
So the finished Beatles music is touched by the fact that it was recorded on film, which imparts this specific quality of public performance and documented history.
Exactly. And this theme of spiritual and visual connection goes even deeper in the source's reflection on music creation. The author reflects on years of alternating between making music and visual art, and notes that when creating ambient music, a lot of it is visual thinking. It's entirely like painting.
That's the concept of music being spatial and visual, not just something that happens over time.
Right. The source cites using sophisticated production techniques like applying reverb along the z-axis to create a sense of distance and space. It makes the music feel almost architectural. The sound is placed within a virtual room.
The source even describes creating these little cinematic treatments for their work. For example, placing the song as if it were playing on a tiny, tiny transistor radio in the corner of a dimly lit room.
It's a profound shift in compositional thinking. You're moving beyond melody and rhythm to think about the audio being consumed in a specific physical place, which makes the music much more immersive and visual for you, the listener.
It connects right back to that wiring thesis and the VR prediction. As technology moves toward immersive spatial audio, the composer has to think visually, architecturally, using sound to define space, not just fill time.
It's a whole new language.
And to close this arc on collective experience and recovery, let's look at the final and I think most profound entry from November 14th, 2025. It's about the long road to collective healing after a period of widespread cultural trauma.
This source offers a really necessary and very sober warning about what recovery actually looks like. It says that spiritual awakening, or just realizing the collective errors of past behaviors, does not automatically fix the damage that's already been done.
Real healing requires forgiveness for those who were harmed during the period of crisis.
And it acknowledges this massive cultural wound, whether it comes from the fragmentation of our attention, the anxiety of AI, or the political conflicts over liberty. The source predicts the world will eventually emerge from what it calls this period of collective psychosis.
But the recovery is not a one-time thing.
No, it's cyclical. The healing process is likened to an autoimmune disease going into remission. The scars will eventually heal over, but the wounds can become active again, causing the symptoms to reappear.
So that implies that the conflict, the tension between liberty and safety, the fear of change, the struggle for focus, it's cyclical. It's endemic to the human experience.
We achieve a temporary equilibrium, but the underlying vulnerability always remains. It requires constant vigilance, much like managing a chronic autoimmune condition.
That's a sobering thought, that our collective vulnerability is always there, just lurking right beneath the surface of the social consensus.
It is.
So we have covered 2 decades of rapid, disorienting evolution, all through the lens of this single recurring day. We saw the aggressive pursuit of speed, reducing comprehensive content down to pure anxiety-inducing exformation.
We tracked the dizzying technological shifts, seeing AI move from a frustrating roadblock to this overwhelming curator, challenging the very definition of creativity and the limits of our attention.
And we analyzed that enduring conflict between collective safety and individual liberty, which is rooted in this deep historical programming that defines what freedom even means to the modern psyche.
What is undeniably clear is that the relentless pace of change driven by the digital realm has fundamentally changed our relationship with reality, with memory, and with creativity. We become these aesthetic consumers seeking pure comfort, the easy, non-conceptual imagery, while standing, as the source said, at the edge of dystopia.
And that brings us to the final powerful and I think deeply provocative thought that was recorded on November 14th, 2024. It leaves us with a lasting impression of the ultimate trajectory of the digital world. The source observes that the internet was fundamentally a breach into the collective unconscious and should have never been.
That is a stunning, almost apocalyptic conclusion to this 20-year survey. It describes the open connectivity of the internet, which, was once heralded as the ultimate liberation of information, as the iceberg the modern ship collides